While many of our guests portray characters that commit horrible acts, our first guest witnessed one of the most horrific in American history. I'm, of course, talking about the assassination of our 35th president. What many believe is that as a fellow coworker from Texas School Book Depository, Lee Harvey Oswald is responsible. Our guest, however, has reason to believe that this is not the case. Please welcome to the stage, Buell Fraizer. All right, yeah. And then here to join him is a writer who's been documenting this historic event for over 30 years, I believe, and is here to present his findings in the book titled My Life Researching the JFK Assassination. Please welcome Ed
Edwards Patia. And thank you.
Patia, yeah. It's like I had it, and then it's
that's
just...
That's why it said Edwards on the air.
Right.
It's
Thank
impossible
y'all.
to
Thank
say
y'all.
Patia. Thank you.
Okay. Really cool.
Good to see you, Hunter.
Awesome. And I guess we're going to take things back a little bit. And I'd like to know, when was the last time you've talked to an audience about these sorts of events, let alone at a horror convention?
Well, this is my first horror convention, but I talked to a group at the University of Virginia back in April, and I've been going there several years, and I teach a class there for about 2 hours. It's a real rewarding thing. I didn't think at first it would be, but talking to the students and the young minds we have coming in this country is very important that they actually know what happened on that day, because so many people back from that era are now gone.
And then I guess I wanted to find out a little bit what your life was like before you started working at the book depository.
Well, my young life isn't something that I think you'd want to live. I had a very hard upbringing, and when I finally got out of high school, I had an opportunity to come to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. My sister was living there with her husband and 3 children, and they knew that I wanted to go to college, but the situation I was in, that was never going to happen. So they said, won't you come on and live with us until you find your employment? And I did that. And when I first got there, I looked around, and being someone from out of that area, it was very hard at that time to find employment, because most people, if you were from some other part of the country or state, they didn't really want to hire you. But I had gone to an employment agency, and I'd filled out an application, and about a week later, the lady called me, and she says, I have a opportunity to discuss with you. Can you come to my office? And I said, sure. So I got in my car, and I drove over there, and she says, there's a position open, but it's in downtown Dallas. And what do you think about that? I said, well, if that's where I have to go, that's where I have to go. I'm very open-minded, even back then, and I am today. So I went in and had an interview with Mr. Roy Truly, and he hired me. But before he hired me, he told me, he said, well, this is really hard work. He says, but he didn't know about my past. He didn't know the upbringing I had, and working on ranches and working 14 hours a day. And I told him, I said, I can do it. And he gave me an opportunity, and I took the ball and I ran with it. And I seemed to do very well there. I was a quick learner. And nowadays, when a person goes to work, back then they called them warehouses. But the terminology they use today is the distribution center. When you go to work in a distribution center as an order filler, such as I did, or an order puller, you get a printout. It tells you how many copies of an item they want, the location, but back then, computer printers and printouts were just coming in. It was the early stages of the technology field. And we got the orders printed off a printer. All it told you was how many copies they wanted of a textbook. It did not tell you where to find it. So I was a quick learner, and I did very well at doing that. And I really appreciated I had that ability to do that.
And now, a few weeks later, it turns out that a gentleman was hired at the book depository, and Roy Truly asked you to train him, and that gentleman's name was Lee Harvey Oswald. What was Lee like, and what was it like training him?
Okay, I remember my first day actually meeting Lee Oswald. I was filling an order, and I was up on one of the other floors. And in this warehouse, we had 7 floors and a basement. And I would go to any floor to pull the book on the order. And I was pulling an order. I had quite a large order, and I was working up on one of the other floors above the first floor. And my supervisor, Bill Shelley, he said, and back then I went with Wesley, which is my middle name. He said, "Wesley, I want you to come to my office." So I laid my paperwork down because it was several pages. And I laid it down where I was working, and so I got the freight elevator and I went down to the first floor. And I went over to Mr. Shelley's office. Well, he was sitting there with a young man. And I walked up and I said, "You called me?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "This is Lee. He's going to be working with us." And he says, "What I want you to do is teach him how to fill orders as well as you." I said, "Well, I'll do the best I can, sir." And so for the next 2 or 3 days, Lee was my shadow. He was everywhere I was. And our conversations mainly was about the work we were doing. But on that first day, I found out that his wife lived out in Irving. So I thought at that time he'd be going home out to Irving every day. And I asked him how he got to work, and he said, "Well, I take the bus." And I told him, and after finding out he did not go out to Irving every day, I said, "Well, anytime you want to go, you can ride with me." So we come up with an agreement that he would ride out with me on Friday afternoon and then ride back with me on Monday morning. Now, what he did Friday afternoon after I dropped him off to Monday morning, I don't have a clue. Because here the thing was, I was a young boy, and I was 19 years old, a very young 19 from a rural area, and I wanted to be a 19-year-old kid. And I didn't want to take away any time from him that he would have to share with his family. I just thought that was the thing to do. And so we come to that agreement about the riding, and so he was, like I said, he was with me like my shadow for the next 2 or 3 days, and he was a quick learner, a very good worker. He was always on time. He wasn't a slacker. And I remember I was riding in one morning, and I said, "Well, he's been following you around now about 3 days." I said, "Let's see what he knows." So when I got in to work, I went to my box where I have my orders. And I looked through there, and I got what I call some simple orders, easy orders to fill. And I got a clipboard, and I gave it to him, and he walked up to me, and I said, "Well, this morning," I said, "I'm going to give you this clipboard, and let's see what you can do on your own." And I said, "You'll see me if you have any questions. You're not sure," I said, "just don't fill that out. I'm just going to the next one. And when you see me, we'll go over the order, and I'll read it, and I'll take and show you where they are, how to fill the order." And we did that. And all the things I know about Lee Oswald are good. There's so many people write articles, and they're all bad things. And what bothers me is that some of these people never knew the man. They never talked to the man. And they never even knew there was a man named Lee Harvey Oswald before November the 22nd, 1963. How someone can determine whether a person is good or bad by reading something in a newspaper or an article, I don't understand. I'm a very old-fashioned. I believe you analyze a subject yourself. And people, I've read a lot of things about him that said, oh, well, he did this or he did that when he was in New Orleans. And I look at him and I tell him, I said, what he did in New Orleans, I don't know anything about. I said, all I know is about what he did when he was with me, around me. And I said, he was always very kind to me and my family and all the little children in the neighborhood. Now, this is something a lot of people don't know. When he'd come home with me on Friday afternoon, all the kids in the neighborhood looked forward to Friday afternoon because they knew Mr. Lee was coming. And he would play with all the children in the neighborhood out around the big oak tree that still stands today at Ruth Payne's old house, the yard there, where they played so many games. And hearing my little nieces, which I had three, Diana, Patricia, and Carolyn, and hearing them talk about him, I know he was a good person because they looked forward to playing the different games with him out in the yard. And that's the memory I like to think about.
Now, Buell, you gave him a ride on Fridays back to Irving, except for one day, which was November the 21st, 1963. Tell us what occurred on that November day and when you were bringing him home and he told you the reason why and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, that's a very good question and a good thought to bring up. As I said, he'd ride out with me on Friday afternoon and come back with me on Monday morning. But this week, November the 21st, he came up to me and he says, I'm going to ride home with you today. And I said, fine. And so a little while later, I was filling an order and I looked down and I noticed the date was November the 21st. Well, the next time I ran into him, a few minutes later, I said, today's not Friday. He said, oh, I know that. And I said, well, why do you want to go home? He said, well, Marina has made me some curtains for my rooming house, the room I have rented, and he says, I'm going out to get some curtain rods. And he says, they have some out there in Miss Payne's garage. So I said, fine. So he rode home with me, but I asked him on the way out, I said, are you going to be coming home with me tomorrow? And he said, no. Well, I didn't question him why. That's a decision, he had already come to, and that was fine with me. And so the next morning, being November the 22nd, something was very unusual. When I used to pick him up at the Payne house, he'd either be walking down the sidewalk toward the house where I live with my sister and her husband and three children, which is only about a half a block away. He'd be walking down, or I would pick him up right directly in front of Miss Payne's house. A couple of times I had to honk on the horn. And he'd look out and see me and come out and get in the car. But this morning, November the 22nd, was very different because he not only got up, he walked all the way down the sidewalk to my sister's house, and he put a package in the back seat of my car. Well, he did not know that my sister saw him carrying the package that he put in the back seat of my car. Afterwards, he came and looked into the window. Of course, she wasn't there at the window at that time. So then he's standing there looking in the window, and my mother looks up and sees him, and she was startled, and she said, who is that man? Well, I'm eating my breakfast, and about half asleep, I said, what man, Mama? She said, the one in the window. Well, there he was looking in the window. I said, oh, that's the guy who works with me. And so I got up from the table and went to the back door because we was there in the kitchen den area, and it opened right out onto a carport. Well, I asked him, I said, you want to come in and have a cup of coffee? I'm just about done with breakfast. He says, no, I'll just wait out here for you. So I went back and I finished my breakfast, and which was only 2 or 3 bites. And I finished eating my breakfast and got up from the table and went and brushed my teeth. And when I came back into the living kitchen area, my sister was just finishing up my lunch. So she gave me my lunch, and we walked out the door. Well, he was right outside the door. And so we got in the car. Well, when I was sitting down in the car, I glanced over my shoulder and I saw a package laying on the back seat. So I said, what's in the package, Lee? He said, curtain rods. I said, that's right. You told me you was going to bring those. So I never thought anything about it. How little did I know how important that package was going to be before the day was over. We rode to work together as normal. Lee wasn't a big talker. He would answer you, but he was not someone that would come up and initiate a conversation like, for example, well, this weekend I see the Cowboys are playing home. You going to the game? Never anything like that. But he would answer you, and what we mostly talked about was, and while we were riding along, I always had the radio playing because I was listening for if they had accidents where I could detour around. But we listened to the radio, and we talked about his children. Now, he was very kind of open, and you could get more out of him if you were talking about his children. And he'd always chuckle, and I guess in his mind something had happened over the weekend that was funny to him. But we got to work, and we was there a few minutes early, and so I've been having trouble with my old car, which was a 1954 Chevy. And back in those days, you had a voltage regulator and a generator. Well, if the voltage regulator, the point stuck in it, it'd pull all the juice out of the battery. So we got there a little early, so I was sitting there just letting my car run, hoping it'd have enough juice in it that it would start when I come back, because sometimes we worked overtime. And we had to walk about, a good 250 meters probably up to where we worked. Most of the people I worked with, the way they got to work was by the use of a bus. So there was very few people who had cars. Mr. Shelley had a car, Mr. Truly, Mr. Case, and people like that had cars. So I walked from the parking lot, as I said, which was about 250 meters or so. And we had another warehouse down there by the parking lot, but I had to walk up walk up to Elm and Houston Street. And what I walked through was a large rail shipping yard. If you go to Dealey Plaza in that area today, that rail shipping yard is no longer there. It's you got buildings and everything else there, parking lots, but no rail yard. And as a child, I always thought trains were interesting. So when I'd be walking along, I'd be watching the trains. But on this morning, we usually walk together. But when we got there and I was charging my battery a little bit, he saw what I was doing, so he gets out of the car, takes the package out of the back seat, puts one in the cup of his hand, his right hand, and puts the other one on his armpit. And he walks on ahead of me, and I never did catch up with him because here's the thing. I didn't think it was important to catch up with him. All I was important was that I got to work on time. And so I was watching the switching of the trains back and forth. Now, he did take a package that day with him, and that has been a big controversial question for 54 years. What was in the package? Well, he told me curtain rods. Well, the man never lied to me that I knew of, so why would I doubt him?
Now, Buell, the curtain rod, as you said, we have one here. He put it.
Talking to the mic.
I'm sorry. Yeah, he cupped it in his hand, Here, they can't get up, but do it from there.
All right, so we're going to have a demonstration.
He put one end there and the other end under his arm. Well, you can see it sticks up above my shoulder.
And the
Right.
Mannlicher Kirkconnell gun
Well-
is, what, 6 inches longer?
Well, the thing is, I have told people that's the way he carried the package in front of me. Well, in order for them to carry a rifle such as the Italian Concarneau rifle, Manchester or whatever, how they describe it, he'd have to have arms like a orangutan. He didn't have that. And I have a friend named Josiah Thompson who wrote 6 Seconds of Dallas. He has a rifle of that type, but only a few serial numbers off from the one they found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Well, we measured the wood stock, we measured the barrel. There's no way it fit in the package that the Warren Commission and everybody tried to make me admit. And I stayed with my length. And when Josiah Thompson and I measured it, he said, "You've been telling them all along that that couldn't have been the rifle in that package."
Now, when Lee walked into the building, did you see him again after you initially walked in? On the November 22nd. When you saw Lee walk into the building ahead of you with the package,
Yes.
when did you see him again?
When I looked up, Lee was walking up the back steps on the dock, and he had the package with him. And the next time I saw him was sometime later. It was, I don't know exactly, sometime within 30 minutes of the time we went to work. Where he had gone, after he got inside the loading dock area, because the doors were pulled down, I have no idea. But everything that morning was perfectly normal for his work pattern. We'd worked hard that week. It was misting rain all the way to work. You know, I had to cut my windshield wipers on and off. Back in those days, we didn't have intermittent wipers. And some young people probably find out hard to believe, we didn't have the amenities on cars today that back then we have today. So it was a real misty, nasty morning, but sometime during the time we went to work and lunchtime, it cleared off, and it was a beautiful, sunshiny fall day.
I guess the assassination affected a lot of people in a lot of different ways, but very few people have been affected in the way that you have. And if you could, I would like to just hear you talk a little bit about the after effects of all of this for you, both past and present.
Okay, that's a good question. How did the assassination of John F. Kennedy affect my life? It affected my life more than most people want to know. That morning, a young boy went to work, but he never came home. It's cost me employment. I work for companies. I'm a good worker. I always, if I call in sick, I'm really sick. I have to go to the doctor. But I can't tell you how many times I've lost jobs because people found out who I really was. And so one day, after trying to climb the chain of command, I realized that the job that I wanted, the position I wanted in a company, was never going to be available to me. So what did I do? What I did, I started applying for jobs that where the people hiring you didn't care where you were yesterday. What's important, what are you doing for me right now? And I've had to do that most of my life. And so when you do those type of jobs, you earn a lot less money. A lot of times you have no benefits, no sick leave, no vacation, nothing. And I've had to deal with that. I'm not angry at the world. I'm not mad at anybody. That's just something that happened to me, and I've tried to do the best for what I have. Um, it it affected me so badly that for a long time I tried a lot of things. I tried to lose Buell Fraizer. I've changed my name around different ways, different initials, all kind of things. And one day I realized that I was never going to lose him. So when I applied for my next job, I put my name down there as it is today. Most people can't spell it or pronounce it. That's the way it was when I was going to school. So I went by my middle name, Wesley, which is a very common, easy name to spell and pronounce. But this thing, I think, that happened to me, I think it's made me a very tough-minded person. I try to be humble and nice to people. But if my wife was sitting there, she'd tell you, he's no pushover. You rub him the wrong way, and you'll find out very quickly. But that's not the type of person I want to be. The person I want to be is someone that people see and know that, hey, if I need a hand, he'll help me.
Buell, let's go back to November 22nd, 1963. It's 12:29. A lot of people don't realize you were a witness to the assassination. You're out front on the steps of the school book depository. Tell us what happened at 12:29 into 12:30 on that day.
Okay, we were standing out on the front steps and waiting for the parade to come around. And by the way we knew that there was going to be a parade that come by the building was one of my coworkers, Junior Jorman. He bought a newspaper every day while he's waiting on the bus. And so when I came in to work that morning, he said, hey, I want to show you something. Well, that day I had lots of orders, and it was Friday. I said, Junior, not now. I says, I got to get on these orders. I got to get shipped today. Well, after about the third time, I came back to my box to get orders. He said, I really want to show you something. So I finally laid my clipboard down, and I said, all right, Junior. I walked around to his station, and I said, what did you want to show me? And so he said, look here. He said, the parade is coming right by our building. And he says, do you think we're going to be able to go out to see the parade? And I said, well, I don't know, Junior. I said, I just work here. I'm not anybody's boss. But he knew that I seemed to be in good rapport with Bill Shelley, the supervisor. And let me explain something. Back in that time, 1963, Junior Jordan, by the way, was an Afro-American man. And today we have people that thinks that racism is so bad. They really don't know the true story. Back in the 50s and 60s and 40s, racism is something like you wouldn't want to know in this country. Well, Junior had enough intelligence to know that you just don't go up and bother your supervisor if you're an Afro-American man. So he asked me. And being the good-natured kid I was, I said, all right, I'll go ask. So I went and asked Mr. Shelley, and he asked Mr. Truly, his boss, and then Mr. Truly had to go up and ask Mr. Kaysen. Mr. Kaysen was a guy, he was everybody's boss in that building. And so they talked about it, and Mr. Shelley said, I was down over by his office, and he said, yes, we're going to get to go out and watch the parade. So I went around and told the guys. They were very excited and happy. Now, I'm going to have to admit to you, back when I was a 19-year-old kid, I didn't realize how important that was. Because you stop and you ask yourself, how many presidential parades have you got to be that close to an American president? For me, it's only been one time. But we got to go out and watch the parade, and we were standing on the steps waiting for the parade to come around. Well, it came down Main Street, and it turned onto Houston Street. And when Houston Street comes to Elm, there is you have to really slow down. It's a large curve. So I said to the lady next to me, Sarah Stanton, she worked for one of the publishers in the building, I said, look at Jackie. I said, look how beautiful she is. And she said, yes. And I said, look at the president. Well, at that time, there were publications called Look and Light. And I can't say enough about the photography. The people that was doing the photography for magazines back then did not have the technology they have today. How they made those pictures look so good, I don't know. And a lot of them are not around to tell you. But the thing is, it made you feel like you actually knew them, even though you didn't, because you'd seen so many pictures of them, different places. And it was so realistic. And of course, they turned the corner and they went down toward the triple underpass. Well, I was up on the top step, so I was like just looking right straight out. When the presidential limousine got to a certain point, I couldn't see because there's people standing on the curb there, and you couldn't see the car. But when it went a short ways, then that's when things began to happen. But before they made that turn, they were led by motorcycle policemen. And motorcycle policemen were cutting their bikes on and off, making them backfire. So when the first shot was fired, I thought it was a motorcycle backfire, because if you've never been to Dealey Plaza, it's boxed on three sides and open on one. And in the wintertime, with the wind swirling and everything, sometimes you can hear a sound, and you might hear it again, but it's a echo like kind of in a canyon. And so, of course, the first shot was fired, and then shortly there was two right in succession. And by growing up in the country and shooting different type of firearms, I realized what I was hearing then was gunfire of some type or some type of weapon. But I didn't know what. And, of course, the president was shot, and we were standing there on the steps, and it wasn't long after the president was shot, a motorcycle policeman by the name of Marion Baker rode a bike up there, and he was out, and he come up by me on the steps and went into the building, and Mr. Truly went with him. But he got there very fast, and we were so terrified, and so right after the policeman went in the front doors there, a lady come running up the sidewalk right there by the street where Elm goes down to the triple underpass, and she was crying. And so she said, they have shot the president. Well, I turned to Sheriff Stanton, and I said, what did that woman say? She said, they shot the president. And I said, oh, God. I thought to myself, oh, that's bad. So I was so terrified. And, you know, at that time, people were running, hollering, and falling down. And there was a lot of policemen in the area. So I just stood where I was. I just stood still there, because something told me, don't be moving around. And then, you know, when we learned the outcome of that, which is very sad. And my personal opinion, and that's what it is, I think, you know, I don't know how religious people are. Some people are religious, some are not. But I firmly believe, I think that is when America began to slide from God's grace. if you will look at all the things happened in America since November the 22nd, 1963 to the current, if this tragedy had never happened, I think America would be a better and stronger country than it is today.
Which I guess that sort of reminds me of the Stephen King novel 11/22/63 just a little bit, as far as that whole idea of things could have been better about that. Um, have you ever read or heard any sort of depiction of what happened that day that seems the most realistic to you?
Well, there's a lot of stories written. I can't tell you how many thousand books have been written about this. I think some people have some good ideas, but as I tell people, with their ideas or opinions, they're like noses. Everybody has one. I'm not going to say your opinion is bad or not good, but I don't think anyone knows everything. And for people listening to this, I do believe there is a conspiracy, because I believe this very firmly. When you're assigned to the President of the United States, which I have not, but I have been told, there's only a few people knows where he's going to be at a certain time of day. Now, they have the option to change a 10 o'clock appointment to a 2 o'clock appointment, and they don't have to tell anybody. So I don't think, so many people have written that Lee was just a hothead, somebody that was looking for attention and so forth. I don't think any one person could have come in America 54 years ago and assassinated the president by themselves. Now, conspiracy consists of a group of people working for a common goal, or you could have one person but have assistance from others that are quiet. But you still, it's a conspiracy. You have people working together for a common goal. Some people believe in a conspiracy and some don't. The Warren Commission, when I went to testify before the Warren Commission, they tried very strongly to make my sister and I change our story about a lot of things. I don't know this, but I think that was written before I ever testified. Why would someone that you don't even know where they were on that day try to tell you that they knew more about what happened that you witnessed on the streets of Dallas? Why would they tell you that? Yeah, what was their motive? What was their goal? What was it in it for them? It's sad, once again, that this terrible tragedy happened in our country. I really don't think this country could go through that again. And hope not, that it never happens. But hopefully we'll learn. And I believe with the technology we have today, what concerns me, why are there so many pages that our government is holding from the ordinary person to read? Why are they doing that? What is it in there? There's something in there they don't want you and me or anyone else that lived back then to see. You take some children today in our country, you say, well, that was a terrible tragedy. The president was killed. A lot of times they don't even know what you're talking about. So I wonder what's in those pages that they don't want us to see. I also wonder how much evidence was destroyed.
Which leads to, I guess I read on ABC 2 or 3 days ago that there's over 30,000 documents about the assassination that can and most likely will surface one of these days. And How do you think people are going to respond whenever that happens?
I think it's going to be an eye-opener because people that really study it and have the patience and the intelligence to cycle through things, I think they're going to figure it out. And one of these days, I think they're going to know the truth. And I think they may be really shocked at who the villains really were.
You got anything?
No, that basically wraps it up. But Buell, what we didn't add in, Buell was actually arrested.
Yeah.
And they tried to have him sign a confession that he was working along with Oswald. He was only 19 years old at the time, and he refused to, and almost got in a fight with the police captain was trying to make him do it. Luckily for him, he had the willpower to resist that, or we'd be visiting him in Leavenworth today. but they tried to link him in with Oswald.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk a little bit about your book as well, because you've got over 30 years worth of documentation regarding the event. And
well, thank you, Hunter. Yeah. My book is unlike probably any of the others. There's a chapter in there on what I think happened. However, I was 5.5 when the assassination happened in 1963, and the book is about now meeting these people throughout my life. I had an interest in the JFK assassination from the time I was probably about 16. Mm-hmm. And so I went out and interviewed these people and met these people, and it turns out we're friends. We go do barbecues together. We're doing this together. There's a lot of other people. Jim Lavelle, who's the policeman who was handcuffed to Oswald, the tall policeman. We're friends. I ended up making friends with all these people. We hang out. They come to my house for spring training and stay at my house. It's an interesting thing, and that's what I wrote the book about, the relationships that ended up happening of meeting all the JFK assassination witnesses.
Wow.
It's different.
Absolutely.
It's very different.
Very cool. And where can people order the book? Where can I get it?
You can get it on Amazon.com. Yeah, it just got published 3 weeks ago. It had been Kindle for a while, but now I finally was able to go through all the rigmarole and get it published. And in fact, this is it right here. And you can get it at Amazon.com. And if you do, I thank you. And thank you for plugging the book.
Well, there y'all have it. And
it's available here at the conference for those who are coming.
Oh, hell yeah. So, all of y'all that are out here, y'all can check out his book, buy it.
Yep. And for years, I've been asking Buell. Many years ago, I had him sign me a curtain rod, and I have the only one in existence till today. So I have the first one.
Wow.
And Buell has signed these, and people have offered me, I don't want to tell you how much, for that curtain rod in Dealey Plaza and wherever else, but I had promised them I would never give it up. So anyway, for those of you that are going to be here, you can get a Buell Wesley Fraizer signed curtain rod that says, "What's in the package, Lee?" Lee answered, "Curtain rods." So that's a collectible you will not find anywhere. And of course, Lee is making an appearance with us, if you know what I mean. There's a Lee bobblehead. So we'll have those over at the booth located a few doors down. And this is a great place. I'm enjoying, I'm a friend of Ed Neal's, and I'm enjoying all the different horror things here and all. It's a hoot.
We're all afraid. Does anybody out there have any questions, or any of you guys? Anybody on? Yeah. Oh, hold on just a second.
With the curtain rods that were brought in, were they ever located within the bookstore?
Well, the thing that I heard that they found some curtain rods, but the person that was in charge of, making notes of where this was and why this was found, they couldn't remember. And to this day, I don't know where they were or what happened to them. But until someone proves me different, I'll always believe there were curtain rods in that package. I didn't look inside it. I don't know. But knowing Lee and the way he treated me with respect and courtesy, I think he was telling me the truth.
You got something else? Yeah.
No one else is asking. I'm from Australia, so I don't know much about guns. With the gun that Lee Harvey used, Do they come apart? Like, are they like the guns of today where you can unscrew them, put them together or anything like that? Could he have unscrewed it and made it look like curtain rods?
Yeah, the Carcano did come apart, but it was still longer than the curtain rods. When it did, that's a great question.
Sweet. And you almost... Okay, cool. Okay, let's see if we got anything online. Okay, nothing. All right, and I think that's a good place to wrap. Oh, all right.
Sorry. After the assassination happened, you said the police showed up to the steps really quickly, or one policeman showed up to the steps very quickly. Or was he sort of locally around you, or did he come from somewhere else, as in like theoretically prior knowledge or something like that, or he was just there?
Marion Baker was a motorcycle policeman. He could have been one of the policemen in the parade. I don't know the names of the policemen that were actually in the presidential limousine. I do not know their names. The only body I know is Marion Baker. And the way he was dressed is very similar to the way motorcycle policemen dress today. You can tell the difference.
Marion Baker, for information purposes, was in the back of the parade, and when he heard the shots, he immediately pulled to the curb and ran into the book depository. And when he went up to the second floor, he found Lee Harvey Oswald drinking a Coke in the lunchroom on the second floor, maybe 90 minutes after the shots were fired. Putting some doubt in, could Oswald have raced down the stairs? It's one of the big questions in the assassination. Was there time enough to race down the stairs, get a Coke, open it, drink it, and have the officer come right through and find you at that point? It's close, whether it could be done or not.
Cool. And then I guess we'll wrap it from there.
Well, thank you, Hunter. You did a great job.
Many people have asked me, over the years, I have thought about this a long time, and finally, I have been working on a book. And I hope it will be out in the next year or so. I'm taking my time very carefully and checking things and wording things. And I hope that the public that decides to buy it, I hope they'll think it's worth their time that they have spent reading it. I think you'll kind of get an insight into me that you don't know. And you can think yourself, have you ever read a book that when you got through reading it, you felt so close to the author and the story?
And then I guess where can the people that stay glued online find it? Like, how can we find out?
Well, I don't know exactly how that's going to come about, because I've got to find a publisher. And I've had some help in deciding about who to go and where to go. I just haven't done that yet, because I want to finish the book and have it ready. Because if you know anything about publishing, usually they'll want a couple of chapters to read to see if they're interested. And they can keep your manuscript for 6 months before they tell you, well, we want to do this or we don't. So I'm being very cautious about that, because I don't want my manuscript to lay in somebody's office for 6 months and then say, hey, you know, we decided not to do that. So hopefully whoever I choose will help me get it published, and that it will be a good book. After people have read it, they say, well, you know, I really enjoyed reading this book. And I've had a few books in my lifetime that I read. I used to be an avid reader. And I've often said to myself, I really enjoyed that book. And that's what I want people to say, that when they get through reading it, that it was worth their time and the monetary value that they had to pay to obtain it.
Very cool. So just to recap, go to the booth, y'all's booth, right? And then y'all be selling copies.
Right, or on Amazon.com.
Yes, of my life researching the JFK assassination. And hopefully the publisher that you get, they can put it on blast enough for all of us to find it easily. And so, cool. Thank you for being here, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.